After 3 years managing client accounts, my husband's father gave my position to his poker friend's daughter. I cleared out my office with eerie calm. "She'll love the clients," I said. When the biggest account called the next day, the new manager froze. "They're all pulling out," she gasped, staring at her screen as the conference room door clicked shut behind me, and I knew my world had just shifted forever. Kevin Sr. sat behind his mahogany desk like a king delivering judgment, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. My husband Kevin slouched in the corner chair, studying his shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. The air felt thick, suffocating, like breathing through wet cotton. "We're making some changes to the client management team," Kevin Sr. announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when discussing weekend golf plans. "Casual. Unimportant. Stephanie will be taking over your accounts starting Monday." Stephanie, Robert's 24-year-old daughter who'd graduated 6 months ago with a business degree and zero understanding of what it meant to hold someone's trust in your hands. I felt my face arrange itself into something resembling composure. 3 years. 3 years of arriving before anyone else, staying until the security guard made his final rounds. 3 years of memorizing client preferences, their children's names, their anniversary dates. Mrs. Henderson preferred her contracts printed on cream-colored paper because white reminded her of hospital forms. Mr. Chen's assistant always needed documents sent by Thursday for his weekend review ritual. These weren't just details, they were the threads that wove relationships together. "She's young and eager," Kevin Sr. continued, as if youth and eagerness could replace years of carefully cultivated trust. "Fresh perspective, you know? Sometimes we get too comfortable in our routines. Too comfortable. As if comfort was a weakness instead of the foundation that had built their most profitable client relationships." My husband finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for exactly 2 seconds before darting away again. In those brief moments I saw everything I needed to know. He'd known this was coming. Maybe for weeks. Maybe months. And he'd said nothing. "I understand," I heard myself say, though I understood nothing about how loyalty had become expendable overnight. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of transition timelines and handover procedures. Kevin Sr. mentioned a severance package, something about appreciating my contributions, words that floated around the room like smoke. I nodded at appropriate intervals, signed papers that felt foreign under my fingers, and wondered when I'd become a line item to be resolved. Walking back to my office felt like moving underwater. Colleagues avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens or coffee cups. Linda from reception gave me a sympathetic smile, but even she seemed afraid to get too close, as if whatever had happened to me might be contagious. My former office, looked smaller somehow. The family photos on my desk seemed to mock me now. There was Kevin and me at last year's company picnic, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something his father had said. There was our wedding photo, Kevin Sr. standing proudly beside us like we were his greatest investment. How quickly pride could turn to dismissal. I opened my desk drawers methodically like performing surgery. Personal items went into the cardboard box they'd thoughtfully provided. My favorite coffee mug, the small cactus plant Mrs. Henderson had given me after I'd helped her through a particularly difficult contract dispute. The stress ball shaped like a globe that Mr. Chen had brought back from his trip to Singapore. But it was the bottom drawer that held my real treasures. Behind the emergency chocolate bars and backup reading glasses sat my red leather folder. I'd bought it during my first week on the job, thinking it looked professional and important. Over 3 years, it had become something more precious than any corporate handbook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. Not the official client files that lived in the company database, but the human details that made business personal. Anniversary dates, children's achievements, favorite restaurants, vacation preferences, health concerns they'd mentioned in passing. The kind of information you couldn't find in any spreadsheet or formal report. Mrs. Henderson's husband preferred their meetings scheduled after 10 in the morning because his arthritis made early mornings difficult. Mr. Chen's daughter had just started college and he worried constantly about her adjusting to campus life. The Williams account always sent Christmas bonuses to their vendors because they remembered what it was like to struggle when they were starting out. These weren't just client notes. They were relationship maps, carefully drawn over countless conversations and shared moments. They represented the difference between managing accounts and nurturing connections. I slipped the folder into my purse instead of the cardboard box. Some things were too valuable to leave behind, too personal to hand over to someone who saw clients as numbers on a spreadsheet rather than people with stories and dreams and fears. Stephanie appeared in my doorway as I was taping up the box, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. She wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes all year, and her smile had the practiced brightness of someone who'd never had to earn anything she'd been given. "I'm so excited to work with your clients," she gushed, as if they were gifts being passed down rather than relationships built on years of trust and mutual respect. "I've already started reviewing their files. They seem like such interesting people." Interesting. As if they were characters in a book rather than real human beings who'd trusted me with their businesses, their hopes, their vulnerabilities. "They'll love working with you," I replied, and for the first time all day, I meant exactly what I said, though perhaps not in the way she expected. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I felt strangely calm. The red leather folder pressed against my hip through my purse. A quiet reminder that some things couldn't be transferred in a company memo or explained in a transition document. Some things had to be earned, one conversation at a time, one remembered detail at a time, one genuine moment of caring at a time. The elevator doors closed behind me and I realized I wasn't ending anything at all. I was just changing where the story would continue. The first phone call came Tuesday morning while I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee from my favorite mug. The one with the chip on the handle that Kevin kept saying I should throw away. "Is this Sarah?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, though she sounded uncertain, almost apologetic. "Yes, it's me. How are you, Mrs. Henderson?" "Well, dear, I just got off the phone with your replacement and I have to ask, is her name really Stephanie or am I losing my hearing? She kept calling me Mrs. Hendersmith." I nearly choked on my coffee. Henderson. A name I'd said hundreds of times over 3 years. A name that belonged to a woman who'd trusted me with her late husband's business legacy, who'd cried in my office when the market crash threatened everything she'd worked to preserve. "Her name is Stephanie," I confirmed, not trusting myself to say more. "Oh good, I thought I was going mad." She seemed nice enough, though she did ask me to spell my name for her records. I found that a bit odd, considering I'd been managing her account for 3 years. Considering her name was printed on every document, every contract, every piece of correspondence that had crossed Stephanie's desk during the transition. "She's still getting familiar with everything," I said, the words tasting like sawdust. Of course. These things take time." "Well, I just wanted to say hello. I hope you're enjoying your," what did she call it? "Your sabbatical?" Sabbatical. As if I'd chosen to leave, as if this were some planned adventure rather than corporate exile. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, wondering how many other calls I'd be getting. The answer came sooner than expected. By Thursday, Linda from reception had texted me 3 times with updates that felt like watching a slow-motion car accident. She sent the quarterly reports to the wrong clients. The first message read, "Spelled Mr. Williams' company name wrong in the subject line." Twice came the second. The third arrived Friday afternoon. She forgot to attach the Morrison proposal. They called asking if we were taking them seriously. But it was the group email that really did it. Linda forwarded it to me with a single crying laughing emoji. The subject line read, "Happy birthday, Michael Chen." Except it was spelled Michael, and the email had been sent to all 37 clients on the main list. Mr. Chen, whose name I'd written correctly on birthday cards for 3 consecutive years, whose daughter Jennifer I'd asked about after every major exam, whose preference for green tea over coffee I'd noted after our very first meeting, had received a mass birthday greeting with his name misspelled. I closed my laptop and walked to my kitchen, pulling out ingredients I'd bought earlier that week. Flour, butter, vanilla extract, chocolate chips. My grandmother's recipe, the one I'd tweaked over the years to perfection. The same cookies I'd been baking for my top clients every Christmas, every birthday, every small celebration that mattered to them. While the first batch baked, I wrote cards by hand. Real cards, not the corporate branded ones Kevin Sr. insisted on. Simple cream-colored paper that felt substantial between my fingers. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," I began, my pen flowing across the paper like water finding its path. "I wanted to thank you for the trust you placed in me over the past 3 years. Your strength and wisdom have been an inspiration." Each card was different, personal, specific. I mentioned Mr. Chen's daughter's recent acceptance to medical school. I asked about Mr. Williams' new grandson. I referenced Mrs. Morrison's upcoming anniversary trip to Ireland, the one she'd been planning during our last meeting. The cookies came out golden brown, filling my house with the kind of warmth that couldn't be manufactured or delegated. I packaged them in simple white boxes tied with ribbon. No company logos, no corporate branding. Just treats from someone who remembered what they liked. That evening, Kevin came home smelling like his father's office. Expensive cologne masking the scent of old leather and disappointment. He found me at the kitchen table addressing the last envelope. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Thank you cards. And cookies." "For who?" "People who've been kind to me." He frowned, the way he did when trying to solve a problem that didn't have a clear business solution. "Sarah, you know you can't contact the clients directly. Dad made that clear during the transition." "I'm not contacting clients," I said, sealing the envelope with deliberate care. "I'm thanking friends." Over dinner, he defended Stephanie with the enthusiasm of someone trying to convince himself. "She's learning," he said, cutting his chicken with unnecessary precision. "Everyone makes mistakes in the beginning." I nodded and served dessert. Apple pie made from Mrs. Henderson's recipe, the one she'd shared during a particularly difficult negotiation when we'd worked through lunch. Of course they do. She's eager to succeed. Dad says she has fresh ideas about social media marketing and client engagement strategies. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, though I wondered what social media strategy could replace 3 years of remembered birthdays and handwritten notes. My phone buzzed during dessert. A text from Mr. Chin. "Sarah, hope you're well. Just wanted to say thank you for always remembering the details that mattered. Miss our conversations." I showed Kevin the message. "That's nice," he said, but his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "You should probably keep those interactions brief. We don't want any confusion about boundaries." Boundaries. As if caring about people came with territorial limits. As if relationships could be copyrighted and transferred like office equipment. Later that evening, alone in my study, I opened my laptop and found my contact list. Not the corporate database that belonged to the company, but my personal address book. The one filled with details I'd collected through genuine conversations and shared moments. Mrs. Henderson's home address, where she preferred to receive personal correspondence. Mr. Chen's daughter's college dorm, where care packages were always welcome. The Williams family's lake house, where they spent summers and appreciated hearing from people who remembered their stories. Some gifts couldn't be delegated or learned from training manuals. Some connections couldn't be transferred through corporate memos or explained in PowerPoint presentations. As I prepared the packages for mailing, I realized that Stephanie could have the office, the title, even the client database. But she couldn't have the relationships. Those belonged to the people who had built them, one remembered detail at a time. The girl who couldn't read a room was about to discover that rooms full of people who felt forgotten had very long memories. The post office became my second home that week. I stood in line every morning at 9:30, arms full of carefully wrapped packages that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or profit margins and everything to do with the small moments that make life meaningful. Mrs. Chen's strawberry jam went out first. Not the store-bought kind, but the recipe I'd learned from my mother-in-law before she passed. The one that required standing over a hot stove for 2 hours, stirring constantly to prevent burning. I'd remembered Mrs. Chin mentioning how much she missed her grandmother's homemade preserves during one of our coffee meetings last spring. The label I handwrote simply said, "Made with love," in my careful script. The baby blanket took 3 weeks to finish. Soft yellow yarn because Mr. Williams hadn't wanted to know the gender beforehand. "We want to be surprised," his wife had told me during our last phone call. I'd started knitting the night I cleaned out my desk, each stitch a meditation, each row a prayer for new beginnings. The pattern was simple but elegant, something that would last through multiple babies and eventually become a family heirloom. For Mrs. Morrison, I pressed flowers from my garden between sheets of wax paper, creating bookmarks from the roses and lavender that reminded me of the Irish countryside she'd described so vividly. She'd shown me photos of the cottage where she and her late husband had honeymooned 40 years ago, the place she planned to revisit for their anniversary. "The roses there smell like heaven," she'd said, her eyes distant with memory. Each package went out without fanfare, without business cards or promotional materials. Just my personal return address in the corner, written in the same careful handwriting I'd used for their birthday cards and thank you notes over the years. The responses started trickling in by Thursday. Sarah, the jam is absolutely perfect, Mrs. Chen wrote. It tastes exactly like my grandmother's recipe. How did you know? I've been searching for that flavor for 20 years. Mr. Williams called my personal phone, his voice thick with emotion. The blanket is beautiful. Margaret cried when she opened it. She said only someone who truly cared would remember such details. Are you still available for consulting work? I deflected gently the way I'd learned to do. I'm taking some time to focus on family right now, but thank you for asking. How is Margaret feeling? Is the morning sickness getting better? Much better, thanks to your recipe for ginger tea. She still has the card you sent with the instructions. Meanwhile, Linda's updates from the office painted a different picture entirely. She'd taken to sending me screenshots of Stephanie's social media posts, each one more tone-deaf than the last. Crushing it in client relations. #bosslife, #neversettle. Read one, posted alongside a perfectly staged photo of Stephanie at her desk, laptop open to what looked suspiciously like a Pinterest page rather than client files. Coffee meeting with Mr. Williams. Love connecting with our amazing clients. #networking, #success. Came another, though Linda's follow-up text revealed the truth. She spent the entire meeting trying to pitch him social media services for his manufacturing company. He makes industrial equipment, Sarah. For factories. She kept saying, we need to make your brand more Instagram-worthy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen experimenting with a new scone recipe for Mrs. Henderson. She'd mentioned loving the ones from a bakery in Scotland during our last conversation, when my phone buzzed with a message from Linda that made me pause mid-stir. Emergency. She's locked in the bathroom crying. Something about the Morrison account. Kevin Sr. is pacing his office. Can you call me? Instead of calling, I drove to the office. Not to interfere, not to gloat, but because Linda sounded genuinely worried, and despite everything I still cared about the people I'd worked with for 3 years. I found Linda in the break room, stirring her coffee with unnecessary vigor. She got an email from Mrs. Morrison's assistant, Linda whispered, even though we were alone. Apparently, Stephanie sent them a proposal for modernizing their brand identity, and suggested they needed a younger demographic approach. Mrs. Morrison is 73, Sarah. Her entire client base is retired professionals who value tradition and stability. Oh no. It gets worse. The assistant replied, asking if this was some kind of joke, considering Mrs. Morrison's business specializes in estate planning for seniors. Stephanie panicked and sent 3 follow-up emails trying to explain, each one making it worse. The final one had a typo in Mrs. Morrison's company name. Through the break room window, I could see Kevin Sr.'s office. He stood behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of overripe tomatoes. His free hand gestured wildly, the way it did when he was trying to salvage a situation that had already spiraled beyond recovery. Mrs. Morrison's assistant called to speak with you specifically, Linda continued. When they were told you no longer worked here, they asked for your personal contact information. Stephanie overheard and, well, that's when the waterworks started. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Morrison's number. Not the business line, but her personal cell, the one she'd given me after her husband's funeral last year, when she'd needed someone to talk through the complicated emotions of taking over a business that had been built for two. Mrs. Morrison? It's Sarah. I heard there might have been some confusion about your account, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. Sarah dear, thank goodness. I was hoping you might call. I received the most peculiar email today suggesting I needed to attract 20-somethings to my estate planning practice. I thought perhaps it was some sort of mix-up. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. The new account manager is still learning about your business model. Well, I hope she learns quickly. I've been with this firm for 8 years because of you, dear. Your replacement seems lovely, but she suggested I start a TikTok account to engage with millennials about death planning. I'm afraid I don't even know what TikTok is. After hanging up, I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching employees come and go through the glass doors I'd walked through every morning for 3 years. Some waved when they saw me. Others looked away quickly, as if acknowledging my presence might somehow implicate them in whatever corporate drama was unfolding inside. My phone buzzed with another text from Linda. She's out of the bathroom but won't stop asking how you made the clients actually like you. Kevin Sr. wants to know if you'd consider coming back as a consultant. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I drove home and finished making Mrs. Henderson's scones, humming softly to myself as I worked. The afternoon light streamed through my kitchen window, warming the flour-dusted countertop where packages waited to be mailed, each one a small act of rebellion against the idea that relationships were transferable assets rather than gardens that required years of patient tending. The scones were cooling on wire racks when Kevin came home that Friday, his shoulders carrying the weight of 3 weeks' worth of disasters. He dropped his briefcase by the door with a thud that seemed to echo through our suddenly too quiet house. "The Patterson Group terminated their contract today," he said without preamble, loosening his tie with jerky movements. 8 years with the firm. Gone. I continued transferring scones to a storage container, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt building somewhere deep in my chest. The Patterson Group. I'd negotiated their first major deal, celebrated their expansion into 3 new markets, sent flowers when Mr. Patterson's wife had her cancer scare. What reason did they give? Kevin opened the refrigerator and stared inside as if the answers might be hiding behind the milk cartons. They said their new account manager seemed unfamiliar with their business model, and they needed someone who could anticipate their needs rather than react to them. Anticipate their needs. Like knowing that Mr. Patterson always reviewed contracts on Sunday afternoons, so Friday delivery was essential. Like remembering that his assistant preferred phone calls to emails because she was dyslexic and processed information better when she could hear it. Like understanding that their biggest client presentations always happened in January, so December was crucial preparation time. And the Henderson manufacturing account? Kevin's silence answered before his words did. Thursday. Same story. They said Stephanie was very enthusiastic but didn't seem to understand their industry. Mrs. Henderson, who'd trusted me with her late husband's legacy, who'd shared stories about building the business from their kitchen table, who'd cried in my office when the recession hit and we'd worked together to restructure their entire operation, who'd always said she stayed with the firm because she felt like family there. The landline rang at 11:30 that night, its shrill tone cutting through the darkness of our bedroom. Kevin fumbled for it, his voice thick with sleep and dread. "Hello." I could hear Kevin Sr.'s voice through the receiver, pitched higher than I'd ever heard it, words tumbling over each other in rapid-fire panic. Kevin sat up, running his free hand through his hair. "Slow down, Dad. What happened?" More frantic talking. Kevin's face grew paler with each passing second. "Yes, she's here. Hold on." He turned to me, the phone extended like an offering or maybe a lifeline. "He wants to talk to you." I took the phone, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Hello, Kevin." "Sarah, thank God. Look, I know this is awkward, but I need to ask, do you know what's happening with our clients? Because I'm getting calls at home and frankly, I'm at a loss." The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This was the same man who dismissed me 3 weeks ago with the casual indifference of someone discarding outdated office furniture. Now he sounded genuinely frightened. "I've heard some people are unhappy," I said carefully. "What exactly are you hearing?" "The Morrison account called my personal line tonight. Said they'd tried reaching their account manager for 3 days with no response. When they finally got through, she tried to schedule them for a brand strategy session next month. Sarah, they're estate planners. They don't need brand strategy. They need someone who understands probate law and grief counseling." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "The Williams Group is asking for their files to be transferred. The Chin account wants to explore other options. These are people who've been with us for years, Sarah. What am I missing?" How could I explain that relationships weren't built on org charts and mission statements? That trust couldn't be downloaded from a client database or learned from a company handbook? "Kevin, these people don't want a vendor. They want a partner. Someone who remembers that Mr. Williams' son is getting married in the spring and that affects their tax planning timeline. Someone who knows Mrs. Morrison still lights a candle every month on the anniversary of her husband's death and might need extra support during those calls. But the files have all that information. Files have facts. They don't have feelings." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was weeding my garden when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Robert stood at my front gate, his usually perfect posture slightly stooped, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "Sarah? Could we talk?" I invited him in, offered coffee, settled him at my kitchen table like any other guest. but his hands shook slightly as he lifted the mug, and his eyes couldn't seem to meet mine directly. "She's trying so hard," he began without preamble. "Stephanie. She studies those client files every night until her eyes water. She's made spreadsheets, flowcharts, even bought books about relationship management." I nodded, genuinely sorry for the girl who was drowning in a job that had looked so simple from the outside. "But it's not working, is it?" Robert's voice cracked slightly. "The clients, they don't trust her. And I don't understand why. She's smart, educated, eager." "Robert, tell me about the first time you fell in love." He blinked, clearly thrown by the change in direction. What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me." "Well, I met Patricia at a coffee shop. She was reading Hemingway and had this tiny frown of concentration. I kept going back every day for 2 weeks just to see that frown again." "Did you study relationship manuals to win her over?" "Of course not, we talked. About books, about life. I remembered what she said, what made her laugh." "Exactly. You can't spreadsheet your way into someone's heart, Robert. And that's what client relationships really are. Professional love stories built on 1,000 small moments of genuine caring." He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee as if it held answers he wasn't ready to face. "She's my daughter, Sarah. My only child. When Kevin Sr. offered her this position, I thought it was perfect. A chance to prove herself, to build something meaningful. She will build something meaningful, Robert. Just maybe not this." That Sunday, while Kevin was at the golf course, a delivery van pulled up to our house. The driver handed me a beautiful arrangement of pink tulips. My favorite, though I'd never mentioned that preference in any office setting. The card was simple cream-colored paper, the kind I'd always chosen for my own correspondence. "Thank you for always remembering us. With gratitude, the Morrison family." I buried my face in the tulips, breathing in their subtle fragrance, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled without reservation. Some gifts couldn't be earned through training seminars or motivational quotes. Some connections were built on the sacred act of truly seeing another person and remembering what you found there. The phone remained silent that afternoon, but somehow I felt more connected than I had in years. The tulips were still fresh in their vase when Kevin announced we were expected at his father's house for Sunday dinner. "Family tradition," he said, though his voice carried the enthusiasm of someone scheduling a root canal. I spent Saturday afternoon making Mrs. Chen's apple pear pie, the recipe she'd shared with me during a particularly difficult contract negotiation 2 years ago. "My grandmother's secret," she'd whispered conspiratorially, "is the cardamom. Just a pinch. It makes people remember the taste long after they've forgotten the meal." The kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and nutmeg as I rolled out the lattice top, each strip carefully woven like the relationships I'd spent years building. Kevin watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to make anything," he said. "Mom always orders from that bakery downtown." "I wanted to. Sarah." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe we should talk about how tonight might go. Stephanie will be there and things have been tense at the office." Tense. Such a polite word for the complete collapse of professional relationships that had taken years to build. Kevin Sr.'s house looked exactly the same as always. Manicured lawn, pristine walkway, everything designed to project success and stability. The irony wasn't lost on me as we walked up the steps to a dinner that promised to be anything but stable. Kevin's mother, Patricia, greeted us with her usual warm embrace, though her eyes held a wariness I'd never seen before. "Sarah, dear, how are you holding up?" Holding up. Another careful phrase that acknowledged something had broken without actually naming it. The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind reserved for important occasions or difficult conversations. Kevin Sr. stood at the head of the table, his smile too bright, his voice too loud as he welcomed us with theatrical enthusiasm. "There's my favorite daughter-in-law." He pulled out my chair with exaggerated courtesy, as if good manners could smooth over the fact that he'd discarded me like outdated office equipment 3 weeks ago. Stephanie arrived 20 minutes late, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. She'd clearly been crying recently, though she'd attempted to cover the evidence with makeup that couldn't quite hide the puffiness around her eyes. "Sorry I'm late," she mumbled, sliding into her seat without making eye contact with anyone. "Traffic was terrible." There was no traffic. I'd driven the same route 30 minutes earlier, and the roads were empty except for the usual Sunday afternoon dog walkers and cyclists. Kevin Sr. raised his wine glass with the flourish of someone determined to control the narrative. "To new beginnings," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the formal dining room. "To fresh perspectives and exciting opportunities." I lifted my glass politely, though the wine tasted like vinegar against the tension that filled the room like smoke. Stephanie stared at her plate, pushing roasted vegetables around without actually eating anything. The conversation limped along through safe topics: weather, sports, Kevin's mother's book club, until dessert arrived. I'd cut generous slices of the pie, each piece perfectly golden with steam rising from the flaky crust. The cardamom's subtle fragrance mixed with the sweet apple filling, creating something that felt like comfort made edible. Everyone took a bite except Stephanie, who sat with her fork poised over the plate as if the pie might contain poison. "This is incredible," Patricia said, closing her eyes to savor the flavor. "Where did you get the recipe?" "A friend shared it with me," I replied simply. "What kind of friend?" The question came from Kevin Sr., though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Someone who understood the value of sharing something meaningful." Kevin cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the suddenly quiet room. "Actually, we've been discussing bringing in additional support for the client services department. Someone to help Stephanie manage the workload." "Help?" Such a diplomatic way of saying she was drowning. "That sounds practical," I said, cutting another small bite of pie. "You had someone who could have helped train her properly." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Stephanie's fork clattered against her plate, the sound making everyone jump. "That's rich coming from you," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "You act like you're so innocent, but we all know what you're doing." "Stephanie," Robert warned from across the table, but she was beyond caring about diplomatic boundaries. "You're sabotaging me." The accusation exploded from her like a burst dam. "Calling the clients, sending them gifts, making them think they can't trust me. It's not fair." I set down my fork carefully, meeting her tear-filled eyes with steady calm. "I haven't called any clients about business, Stephanie. But you're staying in touch with them, making them remember you. You're too emotional to let go and move on like a normal person would." Too emotional. The phrase settled over the table like a layer of dust, revealing more about the speaker than the accused. In Stephanie's world, apparently, caring about people beyond their monetary value was a character flaw rather than a professional strength. Kevin Sr. leaned forward, his mediator voice kicking in. "Now let's all take a breath here. Stephanie, Sarah has every right to maintain personal friendships. Sarah, perhaps you could be more mindful of how your connections might affect the current business relationships." Personal friendships. As if 3 years of professional dedication could be reduced to casual social networking. I stood up slowly, my napkin folding itself neatly as I placed it beside my barely touched dessert. "You know what? You're absolutely right, Stephanie. I'm too emotional. I'm too emotional to watch people I care about be treated like line items on a spreadsheet. I'm too emotional to pretend that relationships don't matter. And I'm definitely too emotional to sit here and be blamed for your inability to connect with human beings." The silence that followed felt dense enough to swim through. Patricia's face had gone pale. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, and Kevin stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Sarah," Kevin began, but I was already moving toward the hallway, already reaching for my purse. "Thank you for dinner, Patricia. The roast was perfect as always." I walked to my car with measured steps, my heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. Behind me, I could hear raised voices spilling from the house. Kevin Sr.'s attempts at damage control, Robert's defensive protests, Stephanie's continued accusations. But as I settled into the driver's seat and turned the key, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: complete and utter peace. The weight that had been pressing against my chest since that first meeting in Kevin Sr.'s office finally lifted, leaving me feeling strangely light. They weren't my problem anymore. The dysfunction, the blame, the desperate attempts to force square pegs into round holes. None of it belonged to me now. I drove home through the quiet Sunday evening streets, windows down, breathing in the scent of autumn leaves and new possibilities. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt free. The weeks after that disastrous family dinner passed in a blur of autumn colors and unexpected quietude. Kevin and I moved around each other like polite strangers sharing temporary shelter. Our conversations reduced to logistics and weather observations. He worked later, I cooked less, and somehow our house felt both emptier and more peaceful. October melted into November with its familiar rituals. Raking leaves, switching out summer clothes, preparing for the holidays that suddenly felt different without the usual office party planning consuming my evenings. I found myself with time I hadn't possessed in years, hours that stretched luxuriously between sunrise and sunset with no urgent client calls or deadline pressures. It was on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving that the first letter arrived. The envelope bore no return address, just my name written in careful script across cream-colored paper that felt substantial beneath my fingertips. Inside, Mrs. Henderson's familiar handwriting filled 2 pages with words that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I know it might seem strange to write an actual letter in this age of emails and text messages, but some thoughts deserve the permanence of ink and paper. I wanted you to know that what you did for me these past 3 years went far beyond managing my account. When Robert died and I thought I might lose everything we'd built together, you didn't just crunch numbers or restructure contracts. You listened to me cry. You remembered his birthday even after he was gone. You made me feel like his legacy mattered to someone besides me." I had to set the letter down and walk to the kitchen for a glass of water before I could continue reading. "You were never just a manager, dear. You were a guardian of what mattered most, the human connections that make business worth doing. I hope you know how rare and precious that gift is." The letter was signed with a pressed violet, the kind that grew wild in her garden each spring. By Friday, 4 more letters had arrived, each one unique yet carrying the same underlying message. "Thank you for seeing us as more than account numbers." Mr. Williams wrote about the difficult early days of his manufacturing business when I'd stayed late helping him restructure his financing, how I'd celebrated with champagne when he landed his first major contract. "You made success feel shared rather than solitary," his letter said. Mrs. Chen's note came with a photograph that made me laugh out loud, her little terrier wearing the red sweater I'd knitted last Christmas, the one with the tiny paw print pattern I'd designed specifically for him. "Mozart loves his sweater," she wrote. "He wears it every cold morning, and I think of your kindness each time I see him in it." The Morrison family's letter arrived on official business letterhead, but the message was entirely personal. "You held our hand through the hardest year of our lives," it read. "When Dad died and left Mom to figure out a business she'd never really understood, you didn't just explain the legal requirements. You translated grief into manageable tasks, helped her honor his memory while building her own confidence." Mrs. Patterson's note was the shortest but perhaps the most powerful. "You taught me that successful business relationships are really just successful human relationships dressed in professional clothes. Thank you for never making me feel like just another client." Each letter felt like a gift I hadn't known I was waiting to receive. They arrived throughout that Thanksgiving week like autumn leaves drifting down, each one settling into place to create something beautiful and whole. Kevin found me reading them again on Thanksgiving morning, spread across our kitchen table like a collection of treasures. He stood in the doorway holding his coffee mug, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Those from the clients?" he asked. "Former clients," I corrected gently. He sat down across from me, picking up Mrs. Chen's letter with careful fingers. After reading it silently, he set it down and met my eyes. "I had lunch with Mrs. Morrison yesterday." This was news. Kevin rarely had business lunches on his own, preferring to let his father handle the client relationship aspects of the firm. "She asked if you might be interested in doing some consulting work. Nothing official, just helping her navigate some year-end planning decisions. She said Stephanie never really understood her business model." I waited, sensing there was more. "She also mentioned that several other clients have been asking about you, wondering if you were taking on independent projects." "And what did you tell her?" "That I'd ask." He paused, rotating his coffee mug in careful half-turns. "Sarah, would you consider going back to the firm? Dad's been dropping hints about bringing you back in some capacity. Maybe as a senior consultant working with the accounts that need more personal attention." The offer hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Going back would mean returning to a place where I'd been dismissed as easily as outdated office equipment. It would mean pretending that the past month hadn't changed everything about how I viewed my worth and my priorities. "I never left the work, Kevin," I said finally. "Just the building." He frowned, not quite understanding. What do you mean? I mean the work I loved. Caring about people, helping them solve problems, being someone they could trust. That didn't require an office or a title or your father's approval. It just required me being myself. 2 days later, Linda texted with news that shouldn't have surprised me but somehow still did. Stephanie cleaned out her desk yesterday. No drama, no announcement. Just an email about pursuing new opportunities. She looked relieved, honestly. I felt no satisfaction at the news, only a quiet sadness for a young woman who'd been set up to fail in a role that required years of patience and genuine caring to master. That afternoon my phone rang. Mrs. Morrison's voice was warm and slightly hesitant. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I know you're not with the firm anymore, but I wondered if you might have time for lunch next week? Just to catch up, nothing business-related. I'd love that, Mrs. Morrison. Wonderful. And Sarah? Bring that red leather folder of yours. I have some friends who might be interested in meeting you. After hanging up, I sat in my garden despite the November chill, watching the last stubborn leaves cling to the oak tree's branches. Somewhere in the distance I could hear children laughing, dogs barking, life continuing its eternal rhythm of endings and beginnings. My revenge hadn't been loud or dramatic. It hadn't involved shouting matches or public confrontations. Instead, it had been built from cookies and handwritten notes, from remembered birthdays and genuine concern, from the simple act of treating people like human beings rather than revenue streams. And as I watched those final leaves release their hold and spiral gracefully toward the earth, I realized that sometimes the most profound victories are the quietest ones, the kind that grow slowly in the soil of authentic relationships and bloom when you're not even watching. It was more than enough. It was everything. If this story of quiet revenge had you rooting for Sarah, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the client sent those heartfelt letters, showing that genuine connections can't be replaced. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Samantha. I'm 28 years old, and the day before my wedding, my sister Allison announced she was pregnant with my fiancé Jackson's baby. The room went silent as my perfect world shattered into a million pieces. After 3 years of building a life with the man I thought was my soulmate, everything was destroyed by the one person I never expected to betray me. But as I pieced together the truth, I realized her entire pregnancy was an elaborate lie. Let me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and settle in, because this story of betrayal and revenge might be the most shocking family drama you'll hear all year. Growing up, Allison and I were inseparable. With only 2 years between us, we shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. Our childhood home in Chicago was filled with laughter and the chaos that comes with 2 girls navigating life together. We built blanket forts in the living room, created elaborate make-believe worlds in our backyard, and defended each other fiercely at school. My parents, Barbara and Michael, often commented on how lucky they were to have daughters who got along so well. But as we entered our teenage years, something shifted. Small competitions crept into our relationship. When I made the cheerleading squad, Allison suddenly became interested in gymnastics and quickly surpassed my athletic abilities. When I brought home an A on a difficult science project, Allison would somehow manage an A+ the following semester. It was subtle at first, the kind of normal sibling rivalry our parents dismissed with a laugh. College drove us further apart. I chose Northwestern to study marketing, while Allison selected DePaul for communications, my original first choice that I'd mentioned for years. During those 4 years, our phone calls became less frequent, our holiday interactions more strained. I noticed how Allison would casually mention the boys I liked were not really your type, or how my career aspirations were a bit predictable. Still, I clung to the belief that sisters have ups and downs, and eventually, we'd find our way back to that close bond. After graduation, I landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm while Allison jumped between various communications roles, never quite finding her footing. Our parents worried about her instability, which only seemed to fuel her resentment toward me. When I purchased my first apartment, Allison commented that I was so conventional, rushing into mortgage debt. When I earned a promotion, she questioned if it was because they needed to meet their quota of female executives. Then 3 years ago, I met Jackson at a charity gala my firm was hosting. He was the architect who had designed the event space, and we connected instantly over our shared love of mid-century design and travel documentaries. Jackson was everything I'd hoped to find: intelligent, ambitious, kind, and with a sense of humor that made even mundane errands feel like adventures. With his dark curly hair, warm brown eyes, and the ability to remember even the smallest details about people he cared about, Jackson quickly became the center of my world. Our relationship progressed naturally. After 6 months, we were spending nearly every night together. At 1 year, we took a trip to Japan that confirmed what I already knew. This was the man I wanted to build a life with. When he proposed during a weekend getaway to Michigan's wine country at sunset, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The oval diamond set in rose gold was exactly what I would have chosen myself. When I told my family about the engagement, my parents were ecstatic. My father immediately shook Jackson's hand and welcomed him to the family. My mother started talking about venue options before we'd even finished our celebration dinner. Allison, however, offered a tight smile and a brief congratulations before excusing herself to take a phone call. When she returned, she'd composed herself enough to ask questions about the proposal, but I noticed her eyes never quite met mine. As wedding planning began, I naturally asked Allison to be my maid of honor. Despite our differences, she was still my sister, and I couldn't imagine anyone else standing beside me. She accepted with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, and for a while, things improved between us. She helped schedule venue tours and accompanied me to catering tastings. She even organized a beautiful engagement party with thoughtful details that showed she'd been paying attention to my preferences. My best friend Melody, whom I'd met in college, was also part of the bridal party. She and Allison had never quite clicked, and Melody occasionally mentioned that something felt off about my sister's sudden involvement in the wedding. "I'm just saying, she's never been this interested in your life before," Melody pointed out during a bridesmaid dress fitting. I dismissed her concerns, grateful to have my sister back in my life and wanting to believe her enthusiasm was genuine. Jackson had met Allison several times before the engagement, primarily at family gatherings. He'd always been polite and engaging with her, but there hadn't been any particular connection between them. Jackson's own family lived on the West Coast, so he valued the closeness of mine despite the occasional tensions. His best friend Tyler often joined us for Sunday dinners at my parents' house, becoming an extended part of our family circle. As the months of planning continued, Jackson and I secured our dream venue, the Botanical Gardens, where we'd had our third date. We chose a date in early June, when the roses would be in full bloom. Everything was falling into place, from the caterer who perfectly executed our desired menu to the photographer whose style captured exactly the warm, intimate feeling we wanted for our wedding memories. The only hiccup came when Allison suggested a last-minute change to the bridesmaid dresses, claiming the sage green we'd selected washed out her complexion. After a tense conversation, she reluctantly agreed to the original choice. It seemed like such a minor issue at the time, just a bride and her maid of honor having a typical wedding planning disagreement. Looking back now, I realize it was the first sign of the storm that was brewing, one that would eventually destroy what should have been the happiest day of my life. With 1 month left before the wedding, preparations intensified. My calendar was filled with final fittings, meetings with vendors, and last-minute details that needed attention. Despite the stress, I was floating on a cloud of happiness. Until I started noticing strange interactions between Allison and Jackson. It began at my parents' Sunday dinner. Typically, Allison would spend these gatherings talking to our mother or scrolling through her phone. But this particular evening, she positioned herself next to Jackson at the table, laughing a bit too loudly at his jokes and touching his arm whenever she spoke. When I mentioned it later that night, Jackson shrugged it off. "She's probably just getting more comfortable with me since I'm about to become her brother-in-law," he reasoned. A few days later, I stopped by Jackson's apartment unannounced with lunch, something I'd done countless times before. As I approached his door, I heard him on the phone. "I can't talk about this right now," he said in a hushed tone. Sam could show up anytime. When I knocked, there was a moment of silence before he answered, his phone nowhere in sight. When I asked who he was talking to, he mentioned a difficult client, but the explanation felt rehearsed. That same week, I noticed several text notifications on Jackson's phone from Allison. One preview read, "We need to discuss what happened." When I asked about it, Jackson explained that Allison was planning a surprise bridal shower and wanted his input. The explanation made sense, but something in his voice wavered just enough to plant a seed of doubt. The incident at the final dress fitting was harder to dismiss. Allison had arrived late, claiming traffic had been terrible. While I was changing back into my clothes, the boutique owner mentioned how lovely Allison had looked in the gown. Confused, I asked for clarification. Apparently, Allison had arrived early and asked to try on my wedding dress, claiming she was considering a similar style for herself. The thought of my sister wearing my wedding dress before me sent a chill down my spine. "You tried on my wedding dress?" I confronted her in the boutique parking lot. Allison rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic, Sam. I'm thinking about getting engaged soon, and I wanted to see how that silhouette would look on me. It's not like I'm stealing your thunder." "Getting engaged? You haven't mentioned you're even dating someone seriously," I replied, increasingly confused. "There's a lot you don't know about my life," she said with a strange smile before changing the subject. During the final menu tasting, Allison peppered Jackson with questions about his preferences. What was his favorite breakfast food? Did he prefer sweet or savory snacks when working late? Was he allergic to any medications? The question seemed odd and overly personal, but Jackson answered politely, giving me a puzzled look when Allison wasn't watching. "Have you noticed Allison acting weird lately?" I asked Melody over coffee that weekend. She's been so focused on Jackson, asking him all these personal questions and texting him about wedding stuff instead of talking to me. Melody set down her cup. "Honestly? Yes. But I didn't want to say anything because you've been so happy about her involvement in the wedding. You don't think?" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "What?" "That something's going on between them." I laughed, though it came out strained. "No way. Jackson would never." And Allison? "Well, she's competitive, but she wouldn't cross that line." "You're probably right," Melody conceded. "It's just pre-wedding stress making everyone act strange." I wanted to believe that was true. But that night, I couldn't sleep, replaying moments from the past few weeks in my mind. The hushed phone conversations, the unusual questions, the way Allison's eyes followed Jackson around the room at family gatherings. Still, I told myself I was overreacting. This was my sister and my fiancé, the two people I trusted most in the world besides my parents. The following weekend, Jackson and I had dinner with his best friend Tyler, who mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Allison sure has been reaching out to me a lot about the wedding," he said casually. "Asked me all about Jackson's college days, his exes, even what kind of engagement ring he had initially considered for you." Jackson frowned. "She's been calling you?" "She never mentioned that." Tyler nodded. "Yeah, said she was putting together some kind of video tribute for the reception and wanted background info." "I figured you knew." There was no video tribute planned for our reception. On the drive home, I finally voiced my concerns to Jackson. "Do you think Allison has been acting strange lately? Especially around you?" He was quiet for a moment too long. "I've noticed she's been more attentive, but I assumed she was just taking her maid of honor duties seriously." He reached for my hand. "Sam, if something's bothering you, just talk to her. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. The next day, I called Allison, intending to have an honest conversation. But when I mentioned her increased interest in Jackson, she became defensive. "Wow, are you actually accusing me of what? Flirting with your fiancé? That's rich, Sam. I'm trying to be supportive and get to know the guy who's joining our family, and you're turning it into something inappropriate. This is exactly why I've always felt like I can't win with you." Her words made me feel guilty and paranoid. Was I letting wedding stress turn me into a bridezilla, suspicious of even my own sister? I apologized, and Allison graciously accepted, suggesting we have lunch later that week to clear the air. But she canceled at the last minute, citing a work emergency. As the wedding drew closer, I tried to focus on the joy ahead rather than the unease that had settled in my chest. Jackson and I finalized our honeymoon plans to Portugal, and I threw myself into last-minute wedding details. But the warning signs continued to flash like neon lights, and I was running out of reasonable explanations to quiet my growing fears. The final week before the wedding arrived with a flurry of activity. Guests were confirming their attendance, welcome bags needed assembling, and last-minute adjustments to the seating chart had to be made. Through it all, Allison had become increasingly difficult to reach. She missed our scheduled time to stuff welcome bags, claiming her phone had died. She was an hour late to the final meeting with the florist, offering no explanation at all. "Has Allison talked to you about the rehearsal dinner?" my mother asked 3 days before the wedding. She was supposed to help me confirm the final head count with the restaurant. "I've barely seen her this week," I admitted. "Have you tried calling her?" "Multiple times. She texts back but never answers her phone." Later that day, I stopped by Allison's apartment unannounced, concerned about her disappearing act. As I approached her door, I heard her voice through the partially open window. "No, you don't understand. It has to be this weekend. I can't wait any longer," she was saying, her voice tense. "Everything is ready. Trust me, this will work." When I knocked, there was a scrambling sound before she opened the door, clearly surprised to see me. "Sam, what are you doing here?" "I came to check on you. You've been MIA all week, and we have a ton of last-minute wedding stuff to handle." Her apartment was unusually messy, with shopping bags stuffed hastily into a closet. A notebook lay open on the coffee table, which she quickly closed as I entered. "Sorry, work has been insane," she said, not meeting my eyes. "But I'm all yours now. What do you need help with?" We spent an hour going through the rehearsal dinner details, but Allison seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and steering the conversation away from anything wedding-related. When I asked about her +1 for the wedding, a date she had mentioned bringing several times, she became evasive. "Oh, that fell through. I'll be coming solo." "I thought you were seeing someone seriously. You mentioned possibly getting engaged soon when we were at my dress fitting." She waved her hand dismissively. "It wasn't as serious as I thought. Can we talk about something else?" That night was Jackson's bachelor party, a low-key evening of poker and drinks with his friends at Tyler's apartment. Meanwhile, I had a spa night with my bridesmaids at a downtown hotel. Allison arrived late, claimed she wasn't feeling well after an hour, and left early. Melody watched her go with narrowed eyes. "Is it just me, or is she acting super sketchy?" Melody asked once Allison was gone. "Something's definitely off," I agreed. "But I can't figure out what." When Jackson returned from his bachelor party the next morning, something about him had changed. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and kept checking his phone. When I asked how the night had gone, his answers were vague. Just the usual. Cards, drinks, guy talk. Nothing exciting. I tried to push away my concern and focus on our rehearsal dinner, scheduled for that evening. But as I was getting ready, my phone pinged with a text from Tyler. "Can we talk before the rehearsal? It's important." We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from a restaurant. Tyler looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his cup. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this," he began, "but something weird happened at the bachelor party last night." Allison showed up. My heart sank. "What? Why?" She said she was dropping off a surprise gift for Jackson. But then she stuck around, having drinks, sitting next to Jackson all night. Some of the guys thought it was strange, but no one wanted to say anything. Then I overheard them talking outside when Jackson was getting some air. What did they say? I barely recognized my own voice. Tyler hesitated. She was standing really close to him, saying something about how they needed to talk about their situation before things went any further. Jackson looked upset and told her it wasn't the time or place. Then they noticed me and stopped talking. I felt sick. "Did you ask Jackson about it?" I tried this morning, but he brushed it off, said she was just being dramatic about some wedding details. Sam, I've known Jackson for 15 years. He's never been a cheater or a liar. But something's not right here. I thanked Tyler for his honesty and somehow made it through the rest of the afternoon in a fog of anxiety. I tried calling Jackson twice, but he didn't pick up, texting that he was with his parents who had just flown in and would see me at the rehearsal dinner. That night, I arrived at the upscale Italian restaurant my parents had chosen for our rehearsal dinner. The private room was beautifully decorated with flowers in our wedding colors, and a slideshow of Jackson and me played on a screen at the front. Family members and the wedding party mingled, cocktails in hand, while I plastered on a smile and tried to quiet the storm in my mind. Jackson arrived with his parents, greeting me with a kiss that felt somehow different. "You look beautiful," he said, but his eyes kept darting around the room. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "You seem nervous." "Just wedding jitters," he replied too quickly. "Where's Allison? Isn't she supposed to give a toast tonight?" The mention of my sister sent another wave of unease through me. She should be here soon. But as the dinner began and guests took their seats, Allison was nowhere to be found. My mother checked her phone repeatedly, becoming increasingly agitated. "This is so irresponsible of her," she whispered. "She knows how important tonight is." We delayed the first course by 15 minutes, but eventually had to proceed without her. I tried to focus on the warm wishes from our guests, the heartfelt toast from my father, the way Jackson's mother embraced me and called me the daughter she'd always wanted. But my sister's absence loomed large, another piece in the puzzling behavior of the past weeks. Just as dessert was being served, the restaurant door swung open, and Allison finally appeared. My initial relief quickly gave way to confusion. She was wearing a form-fitting dress that showcased what appeared to be a small but noticeable baby bump. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she made her way to the front of the room, all eyes following her dramatic entrance. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," she announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I had an important appointment that couldn't wait. But I'm here now, and I have an announcement to make before tomorrow's big day." The room fell silent as my sister took a deep breath, her eyes locking with mine for one chilling moment before she turned to address our stunned guests. "I think my sister deserves to know the truth before she makes the biggest mistake of her life." The rehearsal dinner had been everything I dreamed of. The intimate restaurant bathed in candlelight, tables adorned with miniature arrangements of roses and peonies, the gentle clink of glasses as loved ones gathered to celebrate our upcoming marriage. My father had just finished a toast that left everyone misty-eyed, sharing stories of my childhood and welcoming Jackson to the family. Despite Allison's absence and my lingering concerns, I'd begun to relax, thinking perhaps my worries were simply pre-wedding anxiety. Then Allison made her entrance, and time seemed to slow to an excruciating crawl. "I think my sister deserves to know the truth before she makes the biggest mistake of her life," Allison declared, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Jackson stiffened beside me, his face draining of color. "Allison," my mother hissed, "this is not the time or place for whatever this is." But my sister continued, her hand still resting on what appeared to be a small pregnant belly. "I've been trying to find the right moment to say this, but there isn't one. The truth is..." She paused, her eyes darting between me and Jackson. "I'm pregnant. And Jackson is the father." The room exploded in gasps and murmurs. My father stood up, so quickly his chair toppled backward. Jackson's mother covered her mouth in shock. And I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water, unable to breathe, unable to process the words hanging in the air. "That's not possible," Jackson finally said, his voice strained. "Allison, what are you doing?" "Don't deny it," she shot back, tears forming in her eyes. "We both know what happened. I didn't want to do this here, but Sam needs to know before tomorrow." My vision blurred as I looked at Jackson, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for anything that would tell me this was all some cruel joke. Instead, I found confusion and panic, not the reaction of an innocent man.
"When?"
I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. When did this supposedly happen? Allison's gaze hardened. Does it matter? It happened, and now there's a baby involved. Your wedding needs to be called off. Melody was suddenly at my side, her arm around my shoulders. This is insane. You're lying, Allison. Why would I lie about something like this? Allison shot back, tears streaming down her face now. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to fall for my sister's fiancé? To get pregnant right before their wedding. Jackson stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We need to talk about this privately. Not here, not like this. But it was too late. The damage was done. I looked around at the horrified faces of our guests. Jackson's parents huddled together in shock, my mother weeping silently, Tyler staring at Jackson with disbelief. The beautiful evening had transformed into a nightmare from which there was no waking. I stood up, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. I need air, I mumbled, pushing past Melody and heading for the door. Behind me, I could hear raised voices, my father demanding answers from Jackson, Allison sobbing dramatically, Jackson insisting they needed to talk about this rationally. Outside in the cool night air, I gulped in deep breaths, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Melody followed me out, along with my mother's sister, Aunt Joanne. Samantha, honey, don't believe her, Aunt Joanne urged. This isn't the first time Allison has pulled something like this for attention. But the doubt had already taken root. All the strange behavior of the past weeks suddenly made terrible sense. The secretive conversations, Allison's unusual interest in Jackson, his nervous demeanor since the bachelor party. Had they really betrayed me in the worst possible way? Jackson burst through the restaurant doors a moment later, his face ashen. Sam, please, you have to listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. Then what is it? I demanded, tears flowing freely now. Because it looks like you slept with my sister and got her pregnant. We didn't, he stammered. I don't know what she's talking about. Yes, she came to the bachelor party last night, and we talked outside briefly, but nothing happened between us, ever. I swear to you. Then why is she saying these things? Why does she look pregnant? My voice rose with each question. I don't know. Jackson ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Maybe she's making it up. Maybe she is pregnant by someone else, I don't know. But it's not mine, Sam. It can't be. Inside the restaurant, chaos continued. Through the windows, I could see my father pointing accusingly at Allison, who was now sitting and being comforted by a few relatives who had always taken her side in family disputes. The wedding party stood in awkward clusters, whispering among themselves. I can't do this, I said finally. I can't get married tomorrow, with this hanging over us. Sam, no, Jackson pleaded, reaching for my hands. Don't let her do this to us. We can postpone if you need time, but please, don't end this over a lie. But I pulled away, the engagement ring on my fingers suddenly feeling like a heavy burden. I need time to think. I can't be around either of you right now. I turned to Melody. Can you take me home? She nodded, shooting a disappointed look at Jackson before leading me to her car. As we drove away, I caught a final glimpse of the scene. Jackson standing alone on the sidewalk, my parents emerging from the restaurant looking shell-shocked, and Allison being escorted to a taxi, one hand still protectively cradling her apparent baby bump. Back in my apartment, Melody helped me out of my dress and made tea while I sat in numb silence on the couch. The wedding was less than 24 hours away. Guests had flown in from across the country. Thousands of dollars had been spent on flowers, food, music, and photography. And now, it was all falling apart because of an unthinkable betrayal. What am I going to do? I whispered as Melody handed me a steaming mug. First, we need to figure out if she's telling the truth, Melody said practically. Because something about this doesn't add up. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from family members, bridesmaids, and Jackson. I couldn't bear to read any of them. Instead, I curled up on the couch, trying to remember when Jackson and Allison could have possibly had an opportunity to betray me. They were rarely alone together, always in family settings or group situations. Unless the bachelor party, I said suddenly. Tyler said Allison showed up there. Melody frowned. That's weird timing though, isn't it? If she's showing already, she would have gotten pregnant months ago, not last night. It was a good point, one I hadn't considered in my shock. I tried to remember how far along Allison appeared to be, maybe 3 or 4 months, which would mean she would have gotten pregnant around the time we sent out save the dates, I realized. But that doesn't make sense either. Jackson and I were together almost every day during that period, working on wedding invitations and meeting vendors. As the night wore on, more inconsistencies emerged. My mother called, her voice tight with anger. Samantha, I don't know what's going on, but your father and I don't believe Allison for a second. She's refusing to answer any questions about the pregnancy, when it happened, how far along she is, whether she's seen a doctor. She just keeps saying it's complicated and that you and Jackson know the truth. Another call came from Jackson's mother, who had always been kind but reserved with me. Now, her voice was fierce with loyalty. My son is many things, Samantha, but he is not a cheater. And he loves you more than anything in this world. Whatever is happening here, please don't make any decisions tonight. Give him a chance to clear his name. By midnight, the wedding was unofficially on hold. Melody had contacted the venue and key vendors to explain there was a family emergency, buying us time to figure out what to do. Jackson had stopped calling after I texted him that I needed space, sending only one final message. I love you. I didn't do this. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Allison, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. According to my parents, she had returned to her apartment and wasn't answering her door or phone. The dramatic announcement followed by her sudden disappearance only added to the suspicion growing in the back of my mind. As I finally fell into an exhausted sleep in the early hours of the morning, one thought kept circling. What if this entire pregnancy was a lie? And if it was, how far would Allison go to maintain it? I woke up the next morning, what should have been my wedding day, with swollen eyes and a hollowness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Melody had stayed over, sleeping on my couch, and I could hear her quiet movements in the kitchen as she made coffee. My phone showed 27 missed calls and 49 text messages, but I couldn't bring myself to look at any of them yet. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the wedding dress hanging on my closet door. The delicate lace and pearl details that had once made my heart soar now seemed to mock me. In just a few hours, I should have been getting my hair and makeup done, surrounded by bridesmaids and champagne. Instead, I was trying to piece together whether my sister and fiancé had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. I made coffee and toast, Melody said, appearing in the doorway. And I think we need a plan. I sat up slowly. A plan for what? Canceling the wedding? She shook her head, her expression determined. A plan to figure out what's really going on. Because this whole situation stinks, Sam. Allison's story doesn't add up. But she looked pregnant. I said, the image of my sister's rounded belly still fresh in my mind. Looking pregnant and being pregnant are two different things, Melody pointed out. And being pregnant and carrying Jackson's baby are even more different. We need facts, not drama. She was right. Despite my heartbreak, the analytical part of my brain had been working through the night, cataloging inconsistencies and questions. If I was going to make the biggest decision of my life, whether to marry Jackson or call everything off, I needed the truth. After a shower and coffee, I felt marginally more human. I started by reading through my messages, skipping past the sympathetic notes from bridesmaids and relatives to focus on key people. Jackson had sent several pleading texts reiterating his innocence and asking to meet. Tyler had written a long message detailing his observations from the bachelor party, emphasizing that Jackson and Allison had never been alone together for more than a few minutes. My parents reported that Allison still wasn't answering her door, but had texted my mother that she was resting on doctor's orders. Doctor's orders, I repeated to Melody. Has she ever mentioned seeing an obstetrician? Being pregnant? Any symptoms at all? Melody shook her head. Not to me. And wouldn't that have come up during bridesmaid dress fittings? Pregnant women usually need alterations. Another inconsistency. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down questions and observations. When did the alleged affair happen? How far along did Allison appear to be? Who was her doctor? Why announce the pregnancy so dramatically at the rehearsal dinner rather than privately? By noon, I decided I needed to talk to Jackson face to face. Whatever had happened, I deserved answers from him directly. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near my apartment, neutral territory, where we could talk without family interference. He arrived looking as though he hadn't slept at all, dark circles under his eyes and his usually neat hair disheveled. When he saw me, his expression was a mixture of hope and fear. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting down across from me. "I need the truth, Jackson. All of it. Did you ever have feelings for Allison?" He shook his head emphatically. "Never. Not once. She's your sister, and honestly, she's never been particularly kind to me until recently. I've always just tolerated her for your sake. Did something happen at the bachelor party? Or any other time?" "Nothing romantic or sexual ever," he insisted. "At the bachelor party, she showed up uninvited with a gift basket, which was already strange. Then she kept trying to get me alone, saying she needed to talk to me about something important. When we finally stepped outside for a minute, she started saying cryptic things about how she knew we had a connection and that she could tell I wasn't really happy with you." My stomach clenched. "And what did you say?" "I told her she was completely wrong and that I was madly in love with you." That's when she got angry and said something like, "You'll regret this," before storming off. Tyler saw part of it, which is probably why he was so uncomfortable. "But Sam, I swear on my life, that was it. I've never touched your sister." His account matched what Tyler had told me, which lent it credibility. But it still didn't explain Allison's pregnancy claim or appearance. If what you're saying is true, why would she make this up? Why now? Jackson ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Maybe she's not thinking clearly. Or maybe..." He hesitated. "Maybe what?" "Maybe she's been planning this for a while. You've told me about how competitive she's been with you over the years. How she always wanted what you had." The thought sent a chill through me. Could Allison's jealousy have escalated to this level? To fake a pregnancy and destroy my wedding? After talking with Jackson, I felt marginally better, but still confused. I decided to dig deeper into Allison's recent activities. Melody and I started with her social media accounts, looking for any clues about her supposed pregnancy. "Look at this," Melody said, pointing to a purchase Allison had shared in her Instagram stories 2 months ago, a subscription box of loose-fitting tunics and dresses. At the time, it had seemed like a normal fashion post, but now it took on new significance. "And here," I said, finding an Amazon review Allison had left for a book titled Coping with Morning Sickness. The review was dated just 3 weeks ago. We continued our investigation, discovering more breadcrumbs Allison had apparently left deliberately, a check-in at a women's clinic, though not specifically an OB/GYN, photos where she was suddenly wearing only loose clothing, comments about being so tired lately on friends' posts. But the smoking gun came when Melody remembered something. "Didn't you tell me Allison used her credit card to buy the bridesmaids' gifts last month, and you were going to pay her back?" I nodded, pulling up my Venmo history with Allison. She had indeed charged me for the bridesmaids' gifts, monogrammed jewelry boxes, and I had reimbursed her. With her Venmo username, I could see her public transactions. And there it was, a payment 3 weeks ago to someone named Brandy with the description "Special FX Supplies" followed by a pregnant woman emoji. Clicking on Brandy's profile revealed she was a theater makeup artist specializing in prosthetics. "Oh my God," I whispered. She faked the whole thing. But we needed more concrete proof. I called Tyler, asking if he could meet us and bring his laptop. An hour later, he arrived at my apartment, confused but willing to help. "I need to see any photos or videos from the bachelor party," I explained, specifically of Allison. Tyler pulled up several group photos from the evening. In most, Allison was careful to be photographed from the chest up. But in one candid shot, captured as she was sitting down, something was visible at her feet, a large tote bag with the logo of a theatrical supply company. "Can you zoom in on that?" I asked, my heart racing. Tyler enlarged the image, revealing the bag's contents partially visible, what looked like packaging for a prosthetic pregnancy belly. She brought it with her, Melody realized. She was probably planning to make the announcement at the bachelor party, but changed her mind. We continued gathering evidence, calling bridesmaids who had interacted with Allison recently, checking timestamps on photos and messages, and creating a timeline of her deception. It appeared she had been planning this for at least 2 months, gradually building a fake pregnancy narrative while simultaneously trying to create doubt about Jackson's fidelity. The final piece came when we contacted the restaurant where the rehearsal dinner had been held. The manager remembered Allison arriving early, asking to use their restroom. A staff member had noticed her carrying a large bag into the bathroom and emerging 20 minutes later looking very different. By evening, I had enough evidence to be confident that Allison's pregnancy was entirely fabricated, a desperate attempt to steal Jackson and ruin my wedding. The relief of knowing Jackson hadn't betrayed me was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a new kind of pain. My own sister had tried to destroy my happiness out of jealousy and spite. What do I do now? I asked Melody and Tyler as we sat surrounded by the evidence of Allison's deception. You could still get married tomorrow, Tyler suggested. Most of the vendors are on hold, not canceled. I shook my head. No, it's too soon. Too many people have heard Allison's accusations. We need to clear Jackson's name first. I took a deep breath. And I need to confront Allison. Not alone, Melody insisted. No, I agreed. I have a better idea. A family dinner tomorrow night. Everyone who was at the rehearsal dinner, my parents, Jackson, his parents, you too, and Allison. A confrontation? Tyler asked. An exposure. I corrected, a plan forming in my mind. If Allison wants drama, I'll give her the final act she never expected. I spent the rest of what should have been my wedding day finalizing my plan. My parents agreed to host a family reconciliation dinner at their home the following evening, though they were skeptical about the purpose. I asked them to invite Allison without revealing that I would be there with Jackson. They were confused but trusted my judgment enough to go along with it. Are you sure about this? Jackson asked when I called to explain the plan. Wouldn't it be easier to just tell your parents what we've discovered and let them handle Allison? No, I said firmly. She humiliated us publicly. She tried to destroy our relationship and ruin our wedding day. I need to look her in the eye when the truth comes out. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say and how I would present the evidence. I wanted to be calm and methodical, not emotional or accusatory. This wasn't about revenge. It was about exposing a lie that had nearly cost me everything. Sunday evening arrived and Melody, Tyler, Jackson, and I gathered at my apartment to review our strategy one final time. We had compiled all our evidence into a presentation on Tyler's laptop, screenshots, photos, timelines, and witness statements from the restaurant staff and bridesmaids. Jackson seemed nervous but resolute, while Melody was practically vibrating with righteous anger on my behalf. Remember, I told them as we prepared to leave, let me do most of the talking. No matter how Allison reacts, we stay calm and stick to the facts. We arrived at my parents' house 30 minutes after the time they had told Allison to arrive, ensuring she would already be there. My father opened the door, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion when he saw our group. Samantha? What's going on? Why is Jackson here? I'll explain everything, Dad. Is Allison here? He nodded. In the dining room with your mother. She still claims to be unwell. We followed him through the familiar hallway of my childhood home. As we entered the dining room, I saw Allison seated at the table, still sporting her fake baby bump under a flowing maternity dress. My mother was arranging flowers nearby, her movements stiff with tension. When Allison spotted Jackson, her eyes widened in surprise before quickly narrowing. What is he doing here? She demanded, one hand automatically moving to rest on her stomach. Mom, you didn't tell me he was coming. I asked them not to, I said, stepping forward. Hello, Allison. The room crackled with tension as everyone took seats around the large dining table. My mother attempted to lighten the mood by offering drinks and mentioning the meal she had prepared, but her voice trailed off as she noticed Tyler setting up his laptop at the end of the table. Before we eat, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to address what happened at the rehearsal dinner. Allison made some serious accusations that derailed my wedding and hurt a lot of people. Allison immediately adopted a wounded expression. I only told the truth, Sam. I'm sorry it hurt you, but you deserve to know. The truth, I repeated, nodding slowly. That's exactly what I want to talk about tonight. The truth about your pregnancy. I gestured to Tyler, who pulled up the first slide of our presentation, a timeline of Allison's activities over the past 2 months. Let's start with some basic facts, I continued, turning back to Allison. You claim to be pregnant with Jackson's child. Based on the size of your bump, you appear to be about 3 to 4 months along. Is that correct? Allison shifted uncomfortably. I don't see why I need to discuss the details of my pregnancy with everyone like this. Humor me insisted. When did this alleged relationship with Jackson begin? It wasn't a relationship, she said, glancing at our parents. It was a mistake. One night after a family dinner when you were out of town for work. Jackson shook his head but remained silent as I'd asked. Which family dinner, specifically? I pressed. Does it matter? Allison snapped. It happened. It matters because Jackson has never been alone with you after any family dinner. He's either been with me, with Tyler, or gone home directly to his own apartment. We have location data from his phone to prove it. My father leaned forward. Samantha, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that Allison is lying. About everything. I turned to Tyler, who advanced to the next slide, Allison's Venmo transaction with the special effects makeup artist. This is a payment you made 3 weeks ago, Allison. To a theatrical makeup artist who specializes in prosthetics, including pregnancy bellies for theater productions. The color drained from Allison's face. That's not what that was for. No? Then what about this? Tyler advanced to another slide, showing the theatrical supply bag at Allison's feet during the bachelor party. You brought your fake belly to the bachelor party, planning to make your announcement there, didn't you? But something made you change your mind and wait for the rehearsal dinner instead. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Allison, tell me this isn't true. But my sister remained silent, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. I continued, methodically presenting our evidence. The loose clothing purchases, the strategic social media posts laying groundwork for her pregnancy, the testimonies from restaurant staff who saw her transform in the bathroom before the rehearsal dinner. And finally, I said, reaching the last piece of evidence, the most damning proof. I nodded to Melody, who produced a small paper bag and set it on the table. This morning, we visited 3 pharmacies near your apartment until we found the one where you've been shopping. The pharmacist recognized your photo and confirmed you recently purchased this. I reached into the bag and pulled out a box of prosthetic adhesive specifically marketed for attaching fake pregnancy bellies to skin. The silence in the room was deafening. Allison's face had gone from pale to bright red, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Why? Asked finally, my voice breaking slightly. Why would you do this? Why would you try to destroy my wedding, my relationship, my trust in the person I love? What could possibly be worth all that? For a long moment, Allison said nothing. Then, in a movement so sudden it made everyone jump, she stood up, yanking at the fabric of her dress. Fine. You want the truth? Here's your truth. She reached under her dress and pulled out the prosthetic belly, throwing it onto the dining table where it landed with a dull thud among my mother's carefully arranged plates. Happy now? My parents stared in horror at the silicone form, my mother's hand still pressed to her mouth, my father's face darkening with anger. Allison Marie, he started, using her full name as he had when we were children in serious trouble. What in God's name were you thinking? But Allison wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were fixed on me, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. It's always been about you, hasn't it, Sam? Perfect Samantha with her perfect job and her perfect fiancé and her perfect life. Do you have any idea what it's like living your shadow? Always being compared to you and always falling short. This isn't about competition, I said quietly. This is about you trying to steal the man I love and humiliating me in front of everyone we know. Because you don't deserve him, she shouted, tears streaming down her face now. You don't deserve any of it. I've watched you coast through life getting everything handed to you while I struggle for even a fraction of the recognition or success. Jackson was supposed to notice me first that night at the charity gala. I was there too, you know. But as usual, all eyes were on you. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. You were at the gala? I didn't see you. Of course you didn't, she laughed bitterly. No one did. I was working it, passing out champagne like a servant while you networked and charmed everyone. Jackson came in, and I knew immediately he was special. I was going to introduce myself during a break, but then you swooped in with your perfect hair and your perfect smile. And that was that. Jackson looked stunned. I had no idea you were even there, Allison. You didn't see me, she said, turning to him with a softer expression. But I saw you. And I've watched you for 3 years, seeing how wasted you are on someone who can't possibly appreciate how extraordinary you are. The room fell silent again as the full extent of Allison's obsession became clear. This wasn't just about jealousy or competition. My sister had been harboring feelings for Jackson from afar for years, building resentment and creating an elaborate scheme to take him for herself. Allison, my mother finally said, her voice shaking, you need help. Professional help. This isn't normal behavior. Don't tell me what's normal. Allison shouted. You've always taken her side. Everyone always takes Samantha's side. There aren't sides here, Jackson said, speaking up for the first time. There's just right and wrong. And what you did was wrong, Allison. You lied to everyone, including yourself. I've never had feelings for you, and never will. I love your sister. That's the reality you need to accept. Allison's face crumpled, the last of her composure evaporating. You'll see, she sobbed. You'll realize I'm the one who truly understands you, who truly deserves you. My father stood up, his expression grave. That's enough. Allison, get your things. I'm taking you home, and tomorrow we're finding you a therapist. This behavior stops now. As my father led a still sobbing Allison from the room, my mother turned to me with tears in her eyes. Samantha, Jackson, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry this happened to you both. Jackson reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. It's not your fault, Mrs. Johnson. Allison's actions are her own responsibility. After Allison and my father left, the rest of us sat in stunned silence, the fake pregnancy belly still sitting grotesquely on the dining table like an artifact from a horror movie. My mother eventually wrapped it in a kitchen towel and took it away, returning with a bottle of wine and glasses. I think we all need this, she said, pouring generous servings. Samantha, what happens now at the wedding? I looked at Jackson, seeing the love and concern in his eyes. We'll reschedule, I said with certainty. But first, we need time to process all of this and heal, and make sure all our guests know the truth about what happened. As we sipped our wine and began discussing next steps, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The truth had come out, Jackson was vindicated, and our relationship had survived Allison's attempt to destroy it. But I had lost something precious in the process, my trust in my sister and the belief that family would always have my best interests at heart. What I didn't realize then was that the most difficult part of this journey was still ahead, deciding how to move forward with my relationship with Allison and whether forgiveness would ever be possible after such a profound betrayal. The week after the confrontation was a blur of phone calls, emails, and difficult conversations. Jackson and I had to contact every wedding guest to explain the postponement, careful to share enough of the truth to clear his name without completely humiliating Allison. We lost deposits with some vendors, though many were understanding and willing to reschedule. The beautiful botanical garden even offered us a date in September, giving us 4 months to regroup and decide if we still wanted the same wedding we had originally planned. While dealing with the logistics, I also grappled with the emotional aftermath. Allison's betrayal had shaken my foundation in ways I hadn't anticipated. I found myself questioning other relationships, wondering if I had missed signs of resentment or deceit from people I trusted. Sleep became elusive, my mind replaying the rehearsal dinner and confrontation on an endless loop. "I think you should talk to someone," Jackson suggested gently after finding me awake at 3 in the morning for the 5th night in a row. "A professional, I mean. This is a lot to process on your own." He was right, and 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Tessa Harris, a therapist specializing in family trauma. With her calm demeanor and direct questions, she created a space where I could voice my confusion, anger, and grief without judgment. "What your sister did was a profound betrayal," Dr. Harris acknowledged during our second session. "But I'm concerned about how you're internalizing it. You keep asking what you could have done differently, as if her actions were somehow your responsibility." "Weren't they, though?" I asked. "If I'd been a better sister, more attentive to her needs and feelings." "Samantha," Dr. Harris interrupted gently, "your sister's choices were her own. You can acknowledge the pain and jealousy she feels without accepting blame for her harmful actions. Those are two very different things." That distinction became a cornerstone of my healing process. I could have compassion for Allison's feelings of inadequacy and jealousy without excusing or enabling her behavior. I could love her as my sister while maintaining firm boundaries to protect myself. Meanwhile, Jackson and I were rebuilding our relationship on more solid ground. The crisis had exposed vulnerabilities and assumptions we hadn't previously addressed. We started couples counseling, not because our relationship was failing, but because we wanted to strengthen it against future challenges. "I should have told you about Allison's strange behavior at the bachelor party immediately," Jackson admitted during one session. "I was trying to handle it on my own, protect you from more wedding stress. But in doing so, I created space for doubt. And I should have trusted my instincts about her behavior sooner," I replied. "I saw the warning signs but dismissed them because I couldn't imagine my own sister would hurt me that way." Our counselor helped us develop better communication strategies and establish trust-building practices that would serve us well in the future. Slowly, the fear and uncertainty that had clouded our relationship after Allison's announcement began to dissipate, replaced by a deeper understanding and commitment to each other. My parents faced their own difficult journey. They were devastated by Allison's actions and struggled with how to support both their daughters through the aftermath. My father, who had always been Allison's greatest defender, seemed particularly shaken. "We failed her somehow," he said during a Sunday dinner about a month after the confrontation. "There must have been signs we missed, help we should have gotten her years ago." "Dad, you can't blame yourself," I insisted. "Allison made her choices." "Maybe," he sighed. "But parents are supposed to guide their children toward better choices. To see when they're struggling." My mother reached for his hand across the table. "We're doing that now, Michael. It's not too late." Allison had begun intensive therapy, seeing a psychiatrist twice weekly and attending a support group for people with what her doctor described as maladaptive coping mechanisms stemming from childhood comparison and rivalry. My parents attended some sessions with her, learning how their well-intentioned parenting had sometimes inadvertently fueled the competition between us. For the first 2 months after the confrontation, I kept my distance from Allison. I wasn't ready to see her, and Dr. Harris assured me that was a healthy boundary to maintain while I processed my feelings. We communicated only through brief, civil text messages, usually related to family logistics. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in August, I received an email from her with the subject line, "When you're ready to read this." The body contained a 12-page letter. A thorough, painful accounting of her jealousy throughout our lives, the development of her feelings for Jackson, and the slow evolution of her plan to disrupt our wedding. She didn't make excuses for her behavior, but offered context and genuine remorse. The final paragraph read, "I don't expect forgiveness, Sam. What I did is probably unforgivable. But I want you to know that I'm working hard to understand why I was capable of hurting the person who has always been my biggest supporter, even when I didn't deserve it. You are my sister, and despite everything, I love you. I hope someday we can find a new way to be family again, with healthier boundaries and expectations. Until then, I respect your need for distance and will continue doing the work to become someone worthy of a second chance. The letter moved me to tears. Not because it erased the hurt, but because it was the first time Allison had fully acknowledged her actions without deflection or blame. I shared it with Dr. Harris, who helped me process my complicated response. Forgiveness doesn't have to happen all at once, she reminded me. It's a process, not an event. And it doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation or forgetting what happened. Over the next few weeks, I thought deeply about what forgiveness might look like in this situation. I wasn't ready to welcome Allison back into my life as if nothing had happened, but I also didn't want to carry the weight of anger and resentment forever. In early September, just 2 weeks before our rescheduled wedding, I invited Allison to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we had often studied together in high school. She arrived looking nervous, but healthier than she had in months, her face free of the tension that had become her constant companion. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "Thank you for your letter," I replied. "It couldn't have been easy to write." "It wasn't," she admitted, "but it was necessary. For both of us." We talked for nearly 3 hours that afternoon, navigating painful truths and tentative hopes for the future. I explained how her betrayal had affected me, and she listened without defensiveness. She shared insights from her therapy, including the realization that her feelings for Jackson had never been about him specifically, but about what he represented, a chance to win something she perceived as valuable to me. "I don't expect to be part of your wedding," she said toward the end of our conversation. "I understand that would be asking too much." "You're right," I agreed. "That would be too much, too soon. But I do want you to know that I'm working on forgiving you, Allison. Not for your sake, but for mine. I don't want bitterness to define our relationship forever." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't deserve a sister like you." "It's not about deserving," I said, echoing Dr. Harris's wisdom. "It's about choosing to move forward, however that looks for us." 2 weeks later, Jackson and I were married in a ceremony that looked quite different from our original plans. Instead of the large botanical garden wedding, we opted for an intimate gathering at a small historic mansion with just 50 of our closest friends and family. My mother walked me down the aisle since my father had chosen to stay home with Allison, a decision I supported. Melody served as my maid of honor, and Tyler stood beside Jackson as best man, the two friends who had helped us uncover the truth and supported us through the aftermath. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with vows we had rewritten to acknowledge the challenges we had already overcome and our commitment to facing future difficulties together. At the reception, my father made a brief appearance, embracing me tightly and whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Samantha. Not just for today, but for how you've handled everything with such grace." He handed me a small gift box containing a delicate silver bracelet and a note from Allison. "Wishing you all the happiness you deserve. With love and respect, A." It was a small gesture, but it represented something significant, the beginning of a new, more honest relationship between sisters who had finally stopped competing and started seeing each other clearly. In the years since that day, Jackson and I have built a life together that feels both stronger and more authentic because of what we endured. Allison and I have established a different kind of relationship, more cautious, but also more genuine than before. We see each other at family gatherings and occasionally meet for coffee, carefully rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. The journey hasn't been easy. There are still moments when the pain of betrayal resurfaces, when I question whether true forgiveness is possible after such a deliberate attempt to destroy my happiness. But then I remember what Dr. Harris told me during our final session. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life. The scar remains, but it no longer dictates your choices or steals your joy. Those words have become my mantra. The scar of Allison's betrayal remains, but it no longer dictates my choices. Instead, it has taught me valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. It has shown me the strength of my relationship with Jackson and the importance of honest communication. Most importantly, it has taught me that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating space for a different future. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted, know that healing is possible. It won't happen overnight, and it won't look like you expect, but with time, support, and a commitment to your own well-being, you can move forward without letting the pain define you. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after a major betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video to help others find their way through similar struggles. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most painful chapters lead to the most beautiful beginnings.